What would make a millionaire CEO kiss his secretary in front of 200 guests at a high society gala? Pride, power, passion? No. It was desperation. Graham Whitmore didn't kiss Charlotte Hayes out of romance. He kissed her because he had no other way out, no other escape from a life chosen for him. And Charlotte. She was a former teacher, a widow, just trying to survive quietly, until one kiss turned her into the center of Charleston's richest scandal. But what if that kiss wasn't just a lie? What if it uncovered something real beneath the pretense, beneath the silence? This is not a story about wealth, or status, or even betrayal. It's about a woman who once gave up on love, and a man who never truly knew it until he almost lost her. 12 chapters. One porch light that stayed on, and two hearts learning that the quietest moments are often the loudest truths. If this story touches something in you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's begin. She thought he was walking toward Evelyn. That's where everyone else's eyes had gone, too. Toward the woman in crimson silk and diamond earrings, whose smile was a blade wrapped in sugar. Evelyn DeWitt stood at the edge of the room, waiting, expecting to be the center of the next moment. But Graham Whitmore didn't walk to Evelyn. He walked past her. Charlotte didn't see it coming. One moment, she was adjusting her bracelet, willing her hands to stop shaking. The next, he was standing in front of her, calm, unreadable, tall as ever in his tailored black suit. He said nothing, simply reached up, cupped her face with a hand that felt steady, but warm, too warm. And then, in front of 200 Charleston elites, under the chandelier glow of the city's most prestigious yacht club, he kissed her, not a light brush of lips, not a stage greeting. It was the kind of kiss people talked about for years. Slow, sure, measured like a man used to controlling boardrooms, not hearts. She didn't kiss back, not really, but she didn't pull away, either. Her body froze, breath caught somewhere between resistance and surrender. Around them, everything stopped. The string quartet faltered, champagne glasses hovered midair. Whispered gasps bloomed like ivy across white tablecloths. Evelyn's smile vanished like smoke, and Charlotte stood there, helpless and burning, caught in a moment that wasn't hers to choose. It was over in seconds, but it branded her. When he pulled away, she blinked once, twice searching for meaning in his eyes, something to explain the why behind the what. His hand fell from her cheek slowly, like even he wasn't sure how they got there. He leaned close, not enough for anyone to hear, except her. I had no choice. Then he straightened, face once again a CEO's mask, and turned to greet the room. The world spun back into motion. Applause broke out from somewhere tentative, unsure. Laughter followed, brittle and forced. Charlotte couldn't move, not yet. The truth hid in waves. She had been used. She had been a stage prop, a shield, a performance. Whatever that kiss was to him, an escape, a statement, a strategy, it was not about her. It was about Evelyn, about Helen Whitmore, about whatever power play had just unfolded in front of Charleston society. Her eyes burned, not with tears at least, not yet, but with the sting of humiliation, of surprise, of realizing she was still standing alone while the man who just kissed her worked the room as if nothing had happened. The lighting was suddenly too bright, the air too thick. She needed to leave. Charlotte turned on trembling heels, her satin clutch clenched tight in her fingers. She weaved between tables, brushing against tailored suits and pearls, nodding polite excuses as she passed the coat check. Then the grand staircase. Then, finally, the glass doors that led to the cool autumn night. Outside, the air hit her like a balm. She exhaled slowly, finally, letting her shoulders drop. Somewhere far behind her, laughter drifted through the walls, mingled with string music and the clink of glasses. But none of it belonged to her. Not tonight. She walked toward the edge of the parking lot, gravel crunching under her heels. Her phone buzzed, but she didn't look. She needed space. She needed Charlotte. His voice again, low, urgent. She turned. Graham stood a few feet behind her, hands in his coat pockets now. His posture wasn't the commanding kind he usually carried. It was smaller, worn. She said nothing. He stepped forward, stopped short of touching her. I meant it when I said I had no choice. Still, she didn't speak. Because what was there to say? She had come here tonight as a secretary, a professional, someone who stapled documents, answered emails, fetched coffee. She had not come to be kissed, not to be seen, and certainly not to be made a pawn in a war she didn't understand. Graham didn't wait for her answer. He nodded once more to himself then to her, and turned back toward the building. She watched him go, tall and composed, a man already stepping back into the life that never needed her. Charlotte exhaled again, this time slower. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The night air smelled like sea salt and cedar. Inside her chest, her heart beat a little too fast. Not the kind of fast that came from love, the kind that came from confusion, from disbelief, from something being almost real, but not quite. She stood there a while longer before walking to her car. She didn't cry, not yet, but she knew, even as she turned the ignition, that the next time she saw him, if there was a next time, nothing between them would be the same. Before she became his secretary, Charlotte Hayes used to teach literature. Before that, she was someone's wife. And once long before she stopped believing in fairy tales, she thought her life would follow a quiet, simple line books. Family, love. But life rarely unfolds in straight lines. Now. Charlotte lived in a small, weathered cottage at the edge of West Ashley, not far from the river, but far enough from downtown Charleston to feel like another world. The porch light flickered when the humidity was high. The steps creaked on the third plank, and inside, her mother sat most days in a well-worn armchair, wrapped in a blanket that had belonged to Charlotte's father. Her mother's heart was fragile, the kind that needed watching, the kind that kept Charlotte close. After Daniel, her husband, passed 5 years ago, Charlotte had packed away her lesson plans, turned down the offer to teach again, and traded chalkboards for spreadsheets. She said it was temporary, just something to pay the bills until her mother stabilized. But the months had turned into years, and the spark that once lit up every classroom she entered had dulled into quiet routine. She never expected to end up working at Whitmore Holdings. It had started with a referral from a neighbor whose cousin cleaned offices in the same building. One thing led to another, and suddenly Charlotte found herself typing memos for Charleston's most intimidating CEO, a man with perfect posture and colder eyes than any she'd ever met. Until last night. Last night, Graham Whitmore had kissed her, and not like a man kisses someone he works with. No, that kiss had been something else entirely. Public, calculated, maybe even desperate, but real enough to leave a bruise on her chest right where her heart used to live freely. Now. She sat at the kitchen table, stirring cold coffee. Her mother was still asleep upstairs. The early morning light slanted across the floor, catching the edge of a newspaper she hadn't opened. Her phone sat untouched beside her. It had buzzed 3 times already. She didn't want to see his name. Charlotte wasn't angry, not really. She didn't have the energy for anger anymore. What she felt was smaller, a quiet kind of ache that settled behind her ribs and made breathing harder than it should be. What hurt most wasn't the kiss itself. It was that she'd allowed herself to feel something in those few seconds, something she hadn't felt in years, and then realized it wasn't real. Just business. Just a man trying to escape something, using her as the exit sign. She had made up her mind to resign. She wasn't built for power games. She didn't belong in rooms with chandeliers or people like Evelyn. She'd draft a formal letter, clean out her desk, and disappear quietly. No fuss, no scenes. But fate had different plans. At 9:03 a.m., her phone buzzed again. This time, a message from his assistant. Mr. Whitmore has requested a meeting. 10 sharp, his office. Charlotte stared at the screen for a long while before sliding the phone face down. By 9:50, she was parking in the same underground garage, walking through the glass lobby and stepping into an elevator that hummed too quietly. Each floor lit up like a countdown she hadn't agreed to. By 10:00, she was standing outside his office door. Inside, the space was unchanged, high ceilings, clean lines, the scent of cedar, and something faintly citrus. He stood behind his desk, looking out the window, hands clasped behind his back. That was how he always stood when something heavy needed saying. She waited. He didn't turn immediately. Instead, he spoke to the glass. "I owe you more than an apology." Charlotte didn't respond. She wanted to hear what kind of apology came after a stunt like that. Finally, he faced her. His expression was calm, but there was a weariness there she hadn't seen before. A slight crease between his brows, a softening around the mouth. "I crossed a line," he said, "and I used you to do it." She stayed silent. I didn't plan it. But when I saw Evelyn and what she intended to say in that room, I panicked. Still, Charlotte said nothing. Her silence wasn't cold, just tired. Graham walked slowly to the front of his desk and leaned against it, his arms crossed not in defiance, but restraint. "I need to ask something of you, and I know I don't have the right." She looked at him then, directly. Finally, he met her gaze. "I need you to pretend, just for a while." She blinked, unsure what he meant. "I need you to be my partner, publicly, for the next few weeks. It'll help me end this arrangement with Evelyn cleanly, quietly." The silence stretched. He added, almost gently, "I'll compensate you, generously. Whatever you need for your mother's care, consider it handled." Her heart thudded not from the offer, but from the weight of what it meant. Charlotte took a small breath. So, this was why he kissed her. Not for her, for himself. And now, he wanted to make the lie real, at least for the world to see. She didn't speak, not yet, because words felt too small for the flood rising in her chest. Instead, she turned her eyes to the window behind him, where the morning sun hit the city skyline like a promise she no longer trusted. She had walked into this job thinking she was invisible, but now the most powerful man in the city was asking her to stand beside him, not as an employee, but as a partner in a performance neither of them truly wanted. And somehow, that frightened her more than anything. "You kissed me to escape her," she said quietly, "and now you want me to stay, to pretend I'm yours." The words had echoed in her mind for 2 days. Charlotte hadn't returned to the office since the gala. She needed space away from glass elevators and marble lobbies, away from her reflection in polished surfaces, away from the sound of her own pulse that wouldn't settle. She spent those 2 days tending to her mother, walking slowly through the local grocery store, rereading old poems she used to teach, and thinking about what it meant to be useful to someone, but not seen. But this morning, she returned. The receptionist gave her a hesitant nod, and the elevator ride to the top floor felt like ascending into a version of herself she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. Graham's assistant had said he'd be waiting. When Charlotte entered his office, he was already standing near the window again, like always. That same posture, that same distance. But when he turned to face her, something in his expression had changed. He looked like a man who hadn't slept well, like someone still trying to convince himself this was the best path forward. She didn't sit. She didn't smile. She simply looked at him and asked, "What do you really want from me?" He didn't dodge. He explained about the arrangement between families, an engagement rooted not in affection, but business legacy, about Evelyn, who had grown up with him, and the expectations that had grown with her, about his grandmother, Helen, and the way a single disapproval from her could shift the direction of the entire Whitmore Foundation. And finally, he explained the night of the gala. That kiss, he said, wasn't planned, but it stopped something I didn't want to happen. Publicly, irrevocably. Charlotte didn't flinch, but her throat tightened. She kept her arms crossed, her chin steady. "I'm not someone who plays pretend for a living." she said quietly. He nodded. I know, and I'm not a charity case. I never thought you were. She wanted to believe him. She wasn't sure she could. Then he said it, the part that undid her resolve more than anything else. I'll cover the full cost of your mother's treatment. No matter what you decide. Her breath caught. That wasn't part of the offer. It's not an offer, he said. It's a thank you for what you've already endured. Silence settled between them, heavy and soft, like dust in afternoon light. She looked away, looked toward the bookshelf, where a volume of Frost sat slightly crooked, the kind of detail most people wouldn't notice. But she did, because she had been a teacher, and once she believed in the meaning behind every small thing. When she finally looked back at him, her voice was calm. If I agree to this, pretend relationship, there will be rules. He didn't hesitate. Tell me. 1, she said, no touching, no more unexpected moments like that night. He nodded once. 2, don't ask me to lie about my past. Not to your friends, not to the press, not to your family. Understood. And 3, she paused, her eyes narrowing just slightly. If at any point this becomes more about you than us, I walk. He studied her face then, not like a man evaluating a contract, but like someone trying to read a book written in a language he'd once known but hadn't practiced in years. All fair, he said. She expected resistance. He gave none. That unsettled her more than anything. He stepped forward, just slightly respecting the invisible line she'd drawn, and added, There's a stylist who will be sending over a few things today. Events are already on the calendar. I'll have them sent to you. Charlotte gave a slight nod, then turned to leave. At the door, he said her name. She paused. If I could undo the kiss, he said, I would. Not because I regret it, but because I regret what it cost you. She didn't respond, not with words. Just a brief glance, one he wouldn't be able to interpret. And then she was gone. That evening, Charlotte stood in front of her bedroom mirror. On the bed behind her lay 3 carefully packed garment bags. Each item was tailored, labeled, pressed. The stylist had included notes about color theory, camera angles, and the kind of elegance that whispers instead of shouts. She slipped into the first dress. It was pale blue, silk, soft against her skin in a way that felt like a lie. She looked at herself, really looked, and barely recognized the woman in the glass. The curve of her neck, the way the fabric caught the light, the heels that made her posture straighter than usual. This wasn't her. Not the woman who read poetry aloud to her mother at night, or the one who still wrote grocery lists in cursive. And yet, this was who the world would now see. The pretend girlfriend of Charleston's most untouchable man. Her fingers drifted toward the edge of the neckline, tugging slightly as if she could shift the image back into someone familiar. But it didn't change. Charlotte took a slow breath. Outside, the porch light flickered once, then stilled. At the Whitmore Foundation brunch, she sat beside him, smiled for cameras, let her fingers rest gently on his forearm. It felt like acting until he looked at her like she was the only real thing in the room. The event was held at the family estate, beneath white canopies stretched across the back lawn like sails waiting for wind. Silver trays glided by, carried by gloved hands. Laughter rose in polished waves, carefully measured and rehearsed. Everyone wore white or cream or blush. Like a garden bloomed into people. Charlotte had dressed in soft peach. The stylist had said it brought out her eyes, made her look approachable but elegant. She hadn't known what that meant exactly, but when Graham reached for her hand to help her out of the car, his touch lingered longer than necessary. His nod told her the dress was right, and so they walked in side by side. It was the first time Charlotte had been seen publicly with him since the gala. The kiss was still fresh gossip, still circling in the polished mouths of society, women who smiled with teeth but not with eyes. But today, no one spoke of it openly. They only glanced and whispered. Graham introduced her sparingly. This is Charlotte Hayes, was all he said. No titles, no explanations. Just her name, spoken in a tone that was neither apologetic nor possessive. Charlotte sat beside him during the meal. She listened politely as conversations flitted around real estate and auctions and horse breeding. She nodded, laughed softly when expected, and tried not to shift in her seat too often. Across the table sat Helen Whitmore, posture perfect, pearls glinting just beneath her collarbone. Her gaze swept the table like a lighthouse, cool, unwavering, almost clinical. She didn't speak to Charlotte, but she didn't look away either. At one point, their eyes met, and for a moment, Charlotte saw something strange in the older woman's face. Not approval, not disdain. Something quieter, calculating, perhaps, or simply curious. The brunch lasted 2 hours. The sun grew warmer, the conversations louder. But Graham stayed close. He leaned toward Charlotte occasionally, whispering dry observations about a cousin's hairline, or how the soufflé was clearly the revenge of the cook. His breath brushed her ear. His jokes weren't laugh-out-loud funny, but they were unexpected, human. And each time she laughed genuine, brief. Surprised he looked at her with that same expression, like she was the only one not pretending. It unsettled her, because the whole point was to pretend. When the event finally wound down, they walked back to the car in companionable silence. He opened the door for her again. She slid in. The car pulled away from the estate, past gates older than most buildings in Charleston, and down the quiet road shaded by moss-draped oaks. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The air between them had changed, not heavier. Just quieter, like two people who were no longer sure where the play ended and the truth began. Then, Graham spoke. "There's something I should probably explain," he said, not looking at her. She glanced at him. "My right hand," he continued. "You might have noticed. It trembles sometimes." She nodded. She had noticed, especially in moments when his voice was steady but his fingers weren't. "When I was 15, he said slowly, I fell off a horse. We were at Helen's summer estate in Virginia. I thought I could ride without hands, like something out of a movie." His voice was light, but there was weight underneath. "She told me not to, said it was foolish, so naturally. I did it." Charlotte waited. "I landed hard, broke 2 ribs, sprained my wrist. But the worst was the nerve damage. They said it would heal. Mostly, it did. But the tremor stayed." He flexed his hand once, then let it rest in his lap. "It's worse when I'm tense," he added, "or angry, or afraid." Charlotte didn't respond. She didn't know what to say, but something shifted inside her. She turned slightly in her seat, watching him not as the CEO, not as the man who kissed her out of convenience, but as someone who still carried the echo of that fall. It wasn't the injury that moved her. It was that he'd told her. Unprompted, unnecessary, real. She looked down at his hand. It wasn't trembling now, just still, resting against his thigh, palm up, fingers loose. Her own hand ached, suddenly, to reach for it. Not because the world was watching, not because it was required, but because for the first time since this all began, she felt something that wasn't performance. She didn't take his hand, but she wanted to, and that was new. It wasn't supposed to rain. The forecast had promised clear skies, soft wind, a mild evening for the drive back from the countryside fundraiser. Charlotte had even worn her lighter coat, the one without lining. But Charleston's moods were fickle in spring. By the time they reached the stretch of 2-lane highway flanked by pine and farmland, the drizzle had turned to sheets, and the car, a sleek, expensive sedan too smart for its own good, had started making a sound neither of them could ignore. Then it stalled. No engine light, no warning, just a sputter, a blink, and then the silence that always comes before you realize how far you are from anywhere. They coasted onto the shoulder. Charlotte looked out at the darkening road, rain tapping hard against the windshield, wipers slowing as the power drained. "Well," she murmured, "this wasn't on the schedule." Graham gave a low sound that might have been a laugh or maybe a sigh. He didn't look angry, just resigned. "We'll call for a tow," he said, reaching for his phone, but reception was gone, one bar, then none. She checked hers, same. The silence stretched. Eventually, they both got out umbrellas useless against the wind and walked about a quarter-mile down the road toward the only structure they could see, an old service station, closed for years. The sign was faded, the windows boarded, but the covered porch still stood, dry enough to sit beneath. There was a single yellow bulb above the door, flickering faintly but still alive. They sat on the bench together, wrapped in the shared quiet that rain often brings. Close, but not touching. Until Charlotte shivered. She hadn't noticed how soaked her sleeves were, or how the wind had picked up. Her teeth didn't chatter, but her shoulders curled in on themselves. Without a word, Graham slipped off his coat and draped it over her. She opened her mouth to object. "You'll freeze," but he just gave her a look that said he wouldn't hear it. And so, she let him. He stood, moved toward an old vending machine under the awning, gave it a skeptical look, and to both their surprise, it still hummed faintly. With a few quarters from his pocket, he pressed a button. Moments later, 2 cups of something warm dropped down. Not real hot chocolate, but close enough. He handed one to her. The styrofoam was thin. The steam smelled of cocoa and powdered milk. She sipped anyway. So did he. The rain softened. Just a little. They didn't speak at first. There was no need. Sometimes, silence does more healing than words. Charlotte glanced sideways at him. His shirt was damp, collar clinging. A lock of hair fell across his forehead, darker from the rain. He didn't brush it away. He just stared out at the road, brow relaxed in a way she rarely saw. When he spoke, his voice was low. "My mother used to hum when it rained," he said. Charlotte turned slightly toward him. She'd clean the kitchen after dinner, barefoot, always barefoot, and hum something old, Billie Holiday, I think, the same 2 notes over and over. Charlotte didn't interrupt. "She died when I was 21. Stroke, quick, the kind that doesn't wait for goodbyes." He didn't say more, just sipped the chocolate again, as if the taste might anchor the memory. After a moment, Charlotte replied quietly, "Daniel, my husband loves storms, the louder, the better. He used to pull me to the porch when thunder cracked, said it made the world feel honest for a minute." She gave a soft, almost sad smile. "He died in a quiet hospital room, flu that turned into pneumonia. No storms that night." Graham turned to her. Their eyes met in the half-light. No pity, no performance, just recognition, shared grief, not compared, just held. They sat for a long while, their shoulders nearly touching under the coat now draped across them both. The hot chocolate had gone lukewarm. The wind had softened. The rain fell steady, but lighter. Then, out of nowhere, Graham asked, "Do you ever wish you'd stayed in the past, where it was safe?" Charlotte didn't answer right away. She looked down at her hands, fingers curled around the cup, the coat still heavy across her lap. She thought of the classroom she used to teach in, the warm scent of chalk, her mother's garden before the heart trouble, the sound of Daniel's laugh, unfiltered and loud. She missed it all. But she also thought of this moment, of the road that broke the car, of the rain that made them pause, of the porch light still glowing, when everything else was closed. She looked up. Her voice was quiet. "Sometimes," she said, "but the porch light's still on." He looked at her, then not like a man observing, but like someone listening with every part of himself. And in that moment, Charlotte wasn't pretending. Neither was he. They slept on opposite ends of the sofa. But sometime past midnight, their hands found each other, and neither of them pulled away. The rain had slowed by then, a soft rhythm on the tin roof above the porch, the kind of rain that hushed the world, that asked everything loud to settle down for a while. Inside the abandoned station, the only light came from the flickering bulb above the door and the occasional flash of heat lightning far out in the fields. It wasn't cold, but the dampness had a way of creeping in around the ankles and wrists. They hadn't meant to fall asleep. Not really. But after the conversation, the cocoa, the porch light, the stillness, they'd both stopped trying to fight the weight behind their eyes. The old sofa inside the station's tiny waiting room had been surprisingly intact. Dusty, yes, but sturdy. Charlotte had taken one end, her legs curled beneath her, Graham the other, his coat draped over both their laps like a shared truce. They hadn't spoken much after settling in, just small phrases. Are you warm enough? Yes. Try to rest. Yan, and then silence. But silence wasn't empty. It pulsed gently between them. Not tense, not forced. Just the kind that comes when two people realize they no longer need to explain their presence. Somewhere deep into the night, thunder rolled low over the fields. It didn't wake Graham, but it pulled Charlotte from a dream, the kind she hadn't had in months. In it, Daniel stood beneath the oak tree in their old backyard, calling her name like he always used to, laughing, hands in his pockets, smiling like the world hadn't touched him yet. When she blinked awake, her chest felt too full. She didn't cry, not quite, but her throat burned. Her hands trembled slightly, fingers curled against her ribs. The ache of missing someone never truly faded. It just changed shape. Some nights, it stayed quiet. Tonight, it stirred. She sat still, trying to breathe through it. That's when she felt it, the quiet movement beside her. She turned slightly, just enough to see Graham shift his hand across the cushion. He didn't say anything, didn't reach for her. He simply let his hand rest there, an offering, a question without words. And slowly, carefully, Charlotte reached out and placed her hand in his. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It wasn't urgent, or planned, or even meant to mean more than it did. But the warmth of it grounded her. The weight of his palm in hers reminded her she wasn't alone. That grief could sit beside company and not ruin it. They stayed like that for a long while. Neither spoke. The storm moved farther away. Charlotte closed her eyes again, their fingers still loosely entwined, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt comforted not by the absence of pain, but by the presence of someone willing to sit with it. She didn't know what Graham thought as the night wore on. Whether his mind had drifted to his mother again, or if he simply listened to the rain like a metronome. But his hand didn't pull away, and hers didn't let go. Somehow, that was enough. As dawn edged over the horizon, the sky turned from black to blue-gray. Light crept slowly across the room, revealing dust motes in the still air and the curled edges of old posters on the wall. Charlotte stirred first, blinking into the new morning. Graham's hand was still in hers, their fingers tangled like two branches grown together overnight. She exhaled quietly, not wanting to move too fast, afraid the spell might break. Then, almost on cue, her phone buzzed on the bench beside her. She reached for it with her free hand, careful not to jostle the quiet between them. One new message, from an unfamiliar number, but signed at the bottom, Helen Whitmore. The words were simple, formal. You're both invited to my birthday brunch next Sunday. Noon, family only, no emojis, no warmth, but not a rejection, either. Charlotte stared at the message a moment longer, then slowly. She looked down at their hands, still joined, still quiet. And for the first time since all this began, she didn't feel like she was pretending. She wore navy blue, not black, not red, just enough to not disappear. But the table was full of people who made her feel like she shouldn't have come at all. The Whitmore estate looked different by daylight, less romantic, more imposing. The brick pathways were too perfect, the windows too clean. Even the hedges seemed trimmed with judgment. Charlotte had stood in front of the mirror that morning, longer than usual. She'd tried on 3 dresses before settling on the navy one. Simple, modest, not flashy, but not invisible either. A neckline that didn't apologize, sleeves that didn't demand attention. She told herself it didn't matter. But of course it did. Graham had picked her up in silence. Not cold, just focused. the kind of silence that comes before stepping onto a stage. When they arrived, Helen Whitmore greeted them in the grand foyer with a nod. No smile, just a glance that lingered 1 second longer on Charlotte's dress than was polite. "This way," she said, already walking. The dining room was long and narrow, framed by oil portraits and heavy drapes that filtered the noon light into something gray. At the far end of the table sat the usual suspects: cousins, trustees, old family friends with sharper tongues than memories. And Evelyn? She sat directly across from the seat assigned to Charlotte. Pale pink dress, pearl earrings, her posture perfect, her gaze unreadable except for the faintest tightening around the eyes when she looked up. Charlotte offered a polite smile. Evelyn didn't return it. Instead, she turned slightly toward Helen and asked, "Shall we begin?" There were no toasts, no candles, just silverware, wine glasses, and a heavy silence draped in manners. Conversation came in clipped bursts, topics like boarding schools, foundation funding, and the art gallery opening next month. Each line seemed crafted not to share, but to signal. Charlotte listened, chose her moments carefully. She spoke only when spoken to, offered thoughtful answers, and kept her hands still in her lap. But she felt it, the measuring, the mental arithmetic behind every question. Who is she? What does she want? How long will she last? Evelyn's voice cut sharper than the rest. Not loud, never direct, but each remark had a way of finding Charlotte without ever using her name. I suppose not everyone grew up understanding which fork to use. Some people still believe hard work makes up for heritage. My father used to say, "You can always tell a woman's background by how she holds her silence." Each sentence dropped like lace-covered stones. Charlotte didn't rise to it. She nodded, she smiled. She folded her napkin slower than necessary, just to have something to do with her hands. But inside, something twisted. She wasn't ashamed of where she came from. She'd spent her life being careful, responsible, strong. But this table made her feel like a child holding a teacup too large for her hands. No one defended her, not directly. Helen sipped her tea and offered no rebuke. The others pretended not to notice, except Graham. Midway through the second course, some delicate thing involving duck and figs, he shifted in his seat. Without looking at her, without announcing anything, he let his hand slide beneath the tablecloth, found hers where it rested in her lap. Warm, steady, and took it. Charlotte froze. It wasn't possessive, not performative, just presence. His thumb moved once, just a soft brush across her knuckles, and then stilled. Something in her chest loosened. Not relief, not yet, but recognition. He saw what was happening, and he wasn't going to let her stand in it alone. After dessert, they stood. There were goodbyes, air kisses, the clinking of jewelry and promises to see you at the gala. Charlotte walked beside Graham in silence toward the car, but just before they reached the door, she heard it, Helen's voice low but clear behind them. "You're either brave," she said to Graham, "or a fool." Charlotte didn't turn around. She didn't have to. The words landed not as threat, but as truth. And she knew, standing there in her navy dress and borrowed courage, that she would have to decide soon which one he was. Photos of her old life, her husband's obituary, the unpaid bills. Evelyn didn't need to raise her voice. The evidence did it for her. It happened in a sitting room too elegant for confrontation. The afternoon sun spilled through tall windows, soft and golden, making the silver teapots on the table shine like relics from another era. There were pastries, linen napkins, crystal glasses with lemon slices, but the warmth of the room didn't reach Charlotte. She sat upright, careful with the way she folded her hands, careful with the way she smiled. Helen had invited her for what was described as a casual tea with close family members, nothing formal, just a moment to talk, to get to know each other better. She hadn't expected Evelyn to be there, nor had she expected the envelope. It was pale gray, placed neatly on the center table like an extra guest. Evelyn didn't reach for it right away. She sipped her tea, nodded politely to Helen, exchanged pleasantries with one of the cousins seated near the piano. Then, with the same grace she used to lift her cup, she picked up the envelope and placed it gently in front of Charlotte. "I thought we might all benefit from some clarity," she said, her voice honeyed with condescension. "After all, transparency is what keeps a family strong." Charlotte didn't move. No one else reached for the envelope, but Evelyn did it for them. She opened the flap, slid out the papers neatly printed, clipped, organized like a school report, and began reading softly, as if reciting a menu. Charlotte Hayes, formerly Charlotte Dawson, widow of Daniel Dawson, firefighter, deceased 6 years, no children, former teacher of American literature, left profession in 2020, several unpaid medical bills filed under her name, foreclosure notice served in 2021, currently resides in a rental unit outside of Charleston. She paused, then lifted one of the photos. A simple snapshot, Charlotte in a classroom, years ago, smiling, unaware. Another followed her, standing outside a small hospital room, eyes red, holding a styrofoam cup. And then the last, a photocopy of Daniel's obituary. She said nothing cruel, nothing explicit, but the cruelty was in the delivery, in the placement of facts like knives on fine china. Graham's jaw tightened beside her. Charlotte sat still. She felt her cheeks flush not with shame, but with the humiliation of having her life, her loss, her private grief turned into exhibit pieces. No one said a word, not Helen, not the cousin by the piano, not the aunt whose fingers clutched a napkin so tightly the lace bent. The air in the room turned sharp, like citrus sliced too close to the eyes. Charlotte reached forward not to defend, not to argue. She simply picked up the last photo, folded it once, then once more. She placed it back in the envelope, closed the flap, and laid it down beside her teacup. Then she stood. Her movements were steady, no flinch, no hurry. She placed her napkin beside the saucer, smoothed the front of her dress, and walked to the door. No one stopped her. Behind her, she heard the soft scrape of Graham's chair. Footsteps followed, but at the end of the corridor, before the house gave way to the marble foyer, she turned. He stopped, only a breath between them. Charlotte didn't raise her voice. Her tone was almost tender, tired more than anything else. "Don't defend me," she said. "Just tell me, did you ever see me beyond the act?" His expression shifted, but she didn't wait for an answer. She stepped past him, heels echoing on the marble. Outside, the air was still warm, but the sun had begun its slow descent. She didn't call a driver. She walked 3 blocks to the main road, heels in one hand, the envelope tucked under her arm. Her phone buzzed twice on the way. She didn't check it until the bus arrived, at the back seat. With the city rolling past like a memory she hadn't lived yet, she finally opened the message. It was from the care home. "Ms. Hayes, we'd like to discuss an update regarding your mother's condition. Please call us when you're available. It's important." Charlotte leaned her head back against the window. Her reflection looked older than she remembered, more tired, less afraid. The envelope rested on her lap. She didn't tear it up. She didn't cling to it either. She just held it like a story already written, but not yet finished. She didn't cry when her mother clutched her hand. She cried when she turned off the porch light that night, unsure if it'd ever shine for anyone else again. The house was quiet that week, too quiet, even for the small corner of Charleston where Charlotte lived. The kind of silence that stretches, not because nothing is happening, but because everything is. She came home from the care center each evening a little later, a little heavier. Her mother didn't speak much anymore. There were soft smiles, gentle squeezes of the hand, the occasional glance that lingered just long enough to say what words couldn't. But the conversations had faded, like leaves in late autumn, clinging but fragile. Charlotte didn't bring up Graham, not once, not when her mother asked if she was tired, not when the nurse handed her a list of adjustments to medication, not when she stood by the window and watched the light shift on the oak trees. There were no phone calls, no messages, just the steady hum of routine medicine schedules, warm blankets, lukewarm soup, folded laundry. One evening, while looking for a pair of reading glasses tucked somewhere in the back of the drawer, Charlotte came across a small envelope, yellowed slightly with time, addressed in Daniel's handwriting. She froze. She recognized the loop of his L immediately. She hadn't seen it since before. It was postmarked 6 years ago, a week before his final birthday. She hadn't opened it, didn't even remember receiving it. Maybe she had tucked it away that day, intending to read it later, only later had slipped into grief, into silence, into dust. She sat on the edge of the bed and held it for a long time. When she finally opened it, the paper inside crackled faintly. Lottie, you've always looked forward, even when life tried to hold you in place. But if something ever happens, if I'm not there when the next birthday comes, or the one after that, know this. If love ever finds you again, Lottie, let it. Don't look back for me. You don't owe your life to the past. Just let it find you, and don't hide from it. Love you always. Daniel, her hands trembled as she folded the letter back, but she didn't cry. Not then. She simply placed it beside the nightstand, fingers brushing the edges as if that could somehow hold on to the voice, the man, the echo. That night, she didn't turn on the porch light. She'd always left it glowing, like a habit, a small kindness to herself, a symbol, maybe, of the part of her that was still open to possibility. But not tonight. Tonight, it felt dishonest. She made tea she didn't drink, picked up a book she didn't read, started a letter she didn't send. It was short, careful, written on plain stationery, in her smallest, most deliberate script. Graham, I never asked you to choose. I never asked you to fight, but I did ask you to see me. Maybe I should have known that wasn't fair. For what it's worth, I wasn't acting, not all of it, maybe not any of it. See, she stared at it, folded it once, slid it into an envelope, but didn't write his name on the front. Instead, she opened the drawer beside the couch, placed it underneath a stack of old utility bills, and closed it gently. She stood by the porch door for a long moment, one hand on the light switch. Then she flicked it off. The bulb dimmed with a faint click. Outside, the sky was cloudless, quiet. She stood there, watching the dark settle like dust. And that was when the tears came. Not loud, not broken, just slow, quiet, the kind that didn't ask for comfort, the kind that didn't need to be seen. She didn't expect to see a Bentley parked outside the school, and she certainly didn't expect him to be holding a box of paperbacks in a lunch bag. The first week back at the local middle school had felt like stepping into a version of herself she'd almost forgotten. The classroom still smelled like old paper and whiteboard cleaner, the same wooden desks, slightly scratched from restless hands, the hum of the overhead lights that never quite stopped buzzing. Charlotte moved through her days like someone reacquainting themselves with muscle memory, taking attendance, assigning reading passages, scribbling grammar notes on the board. The students were kind, curious, blissfully unaware of the storm she'd just come through. It was a Friday, warm for early spring. The last bell had rung. Most of the children had bolted outside like colts set loose, backpacks swinging, voices high with weekend promises. Charlotte stayed behind, gathering a stack of ungraded essays and half-shut composition books. When she finally stepped outside, she noticed it. The car, too polished, too out of place. It sat quietly near the curb, the kind of vehicle that drew eyes even when it tried not to. And beside it, leaning slightly, wearing jeans and a worn gray jacket that somehow softened him, was Graham. He wasn't looking at her at first. He was balancing a box of books against his hip. A paper bag hung from his wrist, damp slightly with condensation. There was something almost endearingly awkward about the way he stood there, like he wasn't sure if he was early or too late. Charlotte slowed her steps. She didn't speak, just watched him. He looked up. Their eyes met. No dramatic rush forward, no apologies tumbling over one another. Just stillness, recognition. and something quiet settling between them that hadn't been there before, or maybe had always been there, but buried beneath too many words left unsaid. He walked toward her, stopped a few feet away. Then, gently, he extended the box. "I found these in the office," he said. "Old paperbacks, some signed by authors. Thought your students might like them." Charlotte looked down, saw Hemingway, Dickinson, a weathered copy of To Kill a Mockingbird with notes in the margins. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a notebook, soft leather cover, slightly worn at the edges. She recognized it immediately, her handwriting on the first page, the notebook she used during the earliest weeks working at Whitmore Holdings, where she scribbled appointments, quotes from books, and unknowingly little pieces of herself. "I think this was yours," he said. Charlotte took it gently, her fingers brushing his for only a second longer than necessary. Then he held out one last thing, an envelope, not sealed, no name, just folded once and warm from his coat pocket. She hesitated, then took it. Graham didn't say anything else. He only nodded, gave a soft smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, and stepped back. By the time she looked up again, he was already in the car. Gone, no promises, no explanations, just the memory of him standing there, holding poetry and a brown paper bag, like a man who had finally learned how to show up. Charlotte didn't open the letter until later. The classroom was empty. She sat at her desk, sun filtering through the dusty blinds and golden slats, lighting the specks that floated gently in the still air. She unfolded the page. The handwriting was sharp, familiar, a little rushed. "Charlotte, that night at the yacht club when I kissed you, I told you I had no choice. That was a lie. It wasn't just my only way out. It was the only moment I've ever felt free. You didn't ask to carry my chaos. You didn't ask for my name, or my family, or the mess behind all of it, but you carried it anyway, quietly, without ever asking for anything in return. I saw you, even when I pretended I didn't. And now, all I can ask is, if there's still a place in your world that isn't made of noise, let me be still with you there. G." Charlotte let the letter fall gently onto her lap. She stared at it, not with tears, not with anger, but with a heartbeat she thought had forgotten how to be moved. Outside, students' voices faded, the light grew softer, and inside the quiet, something in her stirred, not certainty, not yet, but the whisper of it. And maybe for now, that was enough. She turned the porch light back on that night. No reason, just in case. Charlotte held the letter in her hand like it was something fragile, something that might vanish if she looked away too long. She hadn't put it back in the envelope. She hadn't tucked it away in a drawer. She just kept holding it. The sun had dipped behind the oak trees, casting long shadows over the quiet street. Her shoes made soft clicks on the porch steps as she made her way inside. Familiar, routine. But tonight, everything felt different. Warmer, looser around the edges. She set the letter on the kitchen table, then moved slowly, deliberately, like each step needed to be felt. She filled the kettle, lit the burner, pulled down her favorite mug, the one with the tiny chip on the handle that only she knew was there. The silence in the house was the same as always, but her heart was not. As the water heated, she opened the notebook Graham had returned earlier that day. The leather cover still smelled faintly of him, woodsy, clean. Her handwriting filled the pages in slanted loops and messy dashes. Grocery lists, meeting notes, quotes she'd copied from books she once taught. She flipped toward the back. There, in unfamiliar script, on a page she hadn't written on, were 2 lines, written in Graham's hand. "Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the light you leave on, just in case someone comes home." Unknown, below it, just his initials, nothing more. The kettle whistled. She poured the water over a tea bag, watched it bloom in slow spirals. The scent of chamomile and something sweeter filled the kitchen. She wrapped both hands around the mug, let the heat settle into her fingers, and then she stood, She walked to the front door, opened it. The air outside was cooler than expected, crisp, almost still. For a long moment, she stood there, mug in hand, letter still sitting on the table behind her. Then she reached out. Her fingers brushed the light switch and clicked it on. The bulb above the porch flared to life, casting a warm, golden circle over the steps and onto the walk. She didn't stand there waiting, didn't look around for headlights or movement. She just turned back inside, and as she pulled the door shut behind her, she heard it. Not loud, not urgent, just the low, familiar purr of an engine easing up to the curb. Her breath caught not in fear, not even surprise, but in knowing. Through the narrow pane of glass beside the door, she saw him. Graham. He didn't step forward, didn't rush. He stood just behind the fence line, hands in his coat pockets, looking up toward the porch, toward the light. They didn't wave, didn't call out. They didn't need to. Because sometimes the only thing louder than words is the silence between two people who have nothing left to hide. The porch light glowed, and in its reflection, Charlotte could see his eyes, soft, open, home. They didn't rush. They didn't kiss. They sat under the porch light like two people who finally had nothing to prove and everything to feel. The night was soft around them. Crickets hummed low in the grass. Somewhere down the street, wind rustled through the maple trees, sending a few early leaves tumbling along the curb. The scent of tea still lingered from inside the house, mingling with the faint warmth of freshly cut wood from a neighbor's stove. Graham sat beside Charlotte on the top step of her porch. His jacket brushed her shoulder every now and then, not deliberately, just enough to remind her he was there, not the CEO, not the name on the company signs, just him. He hadn't brought a speech, he hadn't brought expectations, only a small bouquet of wildflowers, loosely wrapped in parchment paper and tied with twine. Flowers not bought from a florist, but gathered somehow, somewhere with the kind of care that has nothing to do with perfection. Charlotte took them gently, ran her fingers over the soft petals, recognized a few from the field near the old library downtown. No ring, no question, no grand declaration, just a quiet offering that said, "I'm still here, if you are." They didn't speak much, not because there was nothing to say, but because what mattered most didn't need words. Sometimes, that's what healing looks like. Not the apology, not the fixing, just showing up again and not leaving. Graham leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, eyes on the street ahead. Charlotte mirrored him, her hands resting loosely in her lap, flowers cradled in one arm. The porch light glowed above them, casting a soft halo that didn't chase away the dark, just softened its edges. He reached over slowly, not asking, not demanding, just offering. His hand brushed hers, and this time, this first, quiet time, she didn't flinch, didn't freeze, didn't wonder what it meant. She just let her fingers curl around his, steady, warm, still. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of the silence. It didn't feel like the absence of something. It felt full, honest, like all the pretending had finally fallen away, leaving only two people who had lived through enough to recognize real peace when it came. Minutes passed, then more. Neither of them moved to fill the space with conversation. And that strangely, beautifully, was what made it feel so much like the beginning. Because beginnings aren't always loud. They're not always marked with fire or music or certainty. Sometimes, they start on an old wooden step under a porch light, someone turned on, not for hope, but for habit. And yet, hope found its way there anyway. Charlotte turned her head slightly, just enough to meet his gaze. He didn't smile, not fully, but something in his expression eased. She tightened her grip on his hand, just slightly. He nodded once, like a promise neither of them needed to name. The air shifted, not the world, just them. Inside the house, the clock ticked, outside, The wind whispered past like a story that had finally decided on its ending. Charlotte looked down at their joined hands. Not perfect, not polished, but whole and enough. She exhaled slowly, and in that breath, she let go not of him, but of everything that had made her believe she wasn't allowed to feel this again. Her past, her fear, the silence she once mistook for safety. Now, it was something else entirely. It was quiet, and it meant everything. She leaned her head lightly against his shoulder, and in the hush between heartbeats, one thought settled in her chest. It wasn't just an escape anymore. It was home. Sometimes, love doesn't arrive with grand gestures or perfect timing. It shows up quietly on a porch, in silence, after the storm. This story reminds us that healing doesn't always mean forgetting the past. It means allowing ourselves to feel again, even when we're afraid, even when the world tells us it's too late. Charlotte had lost too much to believe in fairy tales. Graham had lived too long behind walls to know what real connection felt like. But somehow, through small acts, shared tea, a return notebook, a porch light left on, they found their way back to something true. And maybe that's the lesson for all of us. That vulnerability is not weakness. That showing up, even with trembling hands, can change everything. That the quietest moments often speak the loudest truths. So, if your heart has grown quiet over the years, let this be a gentle reminder. It's never too late, not to feel, not to forgive, not to begin again with someone, or simply with yourself. Sometimes, the most beautiful stories begin when we stop pretending we don't need them anymore. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If it touched your heart, even just a little, we hope you'll carry its warmth with you. At Shining Stories, we believe that even quiet stories can bring light, especially when they're shared. If this journey meant something to you, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep telling the stories that heal, connect, and inspire. We'll be right here, waiting with the porch light on.